Good afternoon and welcome to Brave Embrace. This is a warm place together where we embrace the brave and find courage in each other. I'm coming to you from the freezing cold Midwest here where it's about 13 below with the wind chill. So I appreciate some warmth. I am so happy to share today and recapping some of the guests that we've had and also talking about some of the things that sexual abuse and assault do to us and how we can inspire hope and courage to find some healing. So, as you remember, we have had some amazing guests over the last couple of months. We had Christine McDonald, who is a courageous survivor of sexual abuse from a child. She was in foster care and a runaway and ultimately ended up in the grips of a trafficker. For years, she fell prey to all kinds of abuse. And through her strength and bravery, after overcoming addiction, found herself in the process of healing. And since that time, she has worked towards several wonderful programs that have brought hope and healing to survivors of sex trafficking and sexual abuse. She has a new drop in center in Kansas City, Missouri, that is welcoming and encouraging those that find themselves being exploited in a warm place. And we had Melinda Metz, a loving friend from Houston, Texas, who inspired many by being a foundational member and starter of several organizations to combat sex trafficking and to help those heal from the tragedies of sexual abuse and assault. She has found her healing by giving back to others, by walking along in the journey of overcoming. And I'm so proud to hear her story and to learn a little bit more about the grip of exploitation and how it's affected so many. We had Crystal Marie, a beautiful soul, coming to us from Germany, who shared her gripping story of being groomed by a neighbor and family friend for years. He wove his way into the family where they believed that he was there for good reasons and ultimately ended up abusing sexually, mentally, and physically beautiful Crystal for many years. She never was able to find justice in the criminal justice system. However, she has worked to find justice by caring for herself, loving her family, and finding ways to process the painful abuse that she suffered. We talked in depth about some of the ways that she works towards finding that healing. She talked of doing a lot of different things for her well being. She reads inspirational books and does yoga. She uses aromatherapy and she's into meditation, things that allow her to find a healing place and a light within her. We also heard from Randy Brewer, a male survivor of crime and an overcomer who was betrayed by a family friend that affected his life, his business, and really threatened to take down everything that he had built and created. By hearing his story, I was so inspired to remember that crime affects us all: men, women, children, elderly, all types of human beings. And we have to unite and find a way to not only seek the brave, work towards the brave, but also to inspire the brave. I've been so honored to hear the stories of those that have suffered, and most importantly, to hear about their journey of overcoming. I also shared a little bit about my story of being a victim of crime. And through the years, the thing that's helped me most is that there is a way to turn the tragedy into a triumph. If we just have the belief and the hope that we can live in another day. So, we're going to talk today about some facts about sexual assault and abuse. We're going to look at some of the ways that it affects our society. And we're going to transition into talking about how we can begin to help those that have suffered, how we can also heal ourselves if we've suffered those losses, and how we can work towards finding healing in our communities at large. RAIN is a wonderful organization that provides all kinds of resources and information for survivors of sexual abuse and sexual violence. And I have found them to be the leader in providing not only up-to-date statistics, but also resources available at every local, state, and national level. That's a website worth checking out. But in doing some research and in getting up to date on some of the statistics, I found a study that had been conducted and was highlighted on their website. And it talked about the millions and millions of Americans who have fallen prey to some form of sexual violence. As I said, this happens to men and to women. And it's tragic because it's happening in our neighborhoods. We found that 17 million American women have fallen prey to some sort of sexual abuse and violence. This takes away their hope. This takes away the belief that they have something to offer. This makes them feel as if they have no self-worth. And it's our goal with this program to, again, embrace that brave, but also bring information that highlights courage. Men suffer in this way as well. We have seen cases in the media recently around survivors of abuse that have come out of Boy Scouts of America and of clergy at different levels and religions. It is imperative that we open a safe place for those men to have a voice. Often we see men in our society as those that have to be strong. And we need to remember that when they've fallen victim to perpetrators in these ways, they also deserve a safe place to land, a healing place that allows them to know that they are not alone. That's another goal of this time together, is to remind ourselves that there is a community of caring people, of survivors that have overcome. And that's our goal. Sexual violence happens in all walks of life, in all neighborhoods. And that study went on to find a large percentage of these assaults happen in or near our homes, in or near our communities. It happens at a family member's home, at public places. The numbers are staggering. We see these incidences played out in crime dramas and on cable shows, but there are lives that are affected. There is brokenness that has occurred. And it's our goal to bring a healing light, to remember that at any point we can rewrite our story. These things do not have to define us, and the abuses we've suffered do not equal who we are as human beings. It's really important for me to share some tips around how to overcome, because the numbers are so big. I've learned that almost everyone that I know has had this either affect themselves or someone in their family. 1 in 6 men have fallen victim to an offender. 1 in 4 or 5 women. That means that those around you now, those next door to you, those that might be in a restaurant with you tonight at dinner, have had this horrible crime affect their lives. So it is important that we learn how to not only offer a healing ear and a compassionate hug, but also that we know how to transition and provide a hopeful process for someone to move through their victimization into some healing. That's what we're going to spend some time doing today. When I was speaking with Crystal a few weeks ago, she shared how writing poetry and journaling has been a helpful process for her, an endeavor that allows her to look back and see how far she's come. I would invite you to find a cathartic way to process loss and victimization. The effects of it go way into our souls, into our psyches, and into our cells. And if we wake up every day showing up wounded and offended, we're not living to the best possibility of life. That's why gathering like this is so important, so that we can remember that we're not alone. This is the month of love. And I think right now our world needs a lot of love, not only to show up for each other, but to show up for ourselves. How do you find encouragement? Where do you lean for hope? That's what I'd like you to stop and think about a little bit today, because ultimately, we need to move towards a divine rescue. We need to move not only to embracing and loving those in our community and those that have suffered, but we need to move towards loving ourselves, learning and knowing that what we've experienced can be overcome. There are a few steps that we're going to talk about today, but knowing that a divine rescue comes from your internal strength and who you are as a person and believing in the power of next is where I'd like to start. There's so much possibility each day as we wake. And oftentimes, the images of the crimes that we've suffered, the losses that we've experienced, the hurt that we feel as a society weighs heavy on our shoulders. It's important to start with a routine that allows for there to be some belief in what's possible. I don't mean to sound catty when I say waking up and finding something that you can look forward to in the day is such a crucial first step. For me, I do that through prayer and meditation, realizing that it's not just me that is struggling. It's not just me that has suffered from these incidences, but there are other people that I will engage with throughout the day. And if I show up wounded and hurt and sad, then I'm going to be breeding more and more of that. But if I work to show up with love and hope and inspiration, that's the legacy that I'm going to be putting into others during the day. So I'd like you to start by thinking about what your morning routine looks like. When you open your eyes, are you first wanting to feel grateful? I want to ask you about the thoughts in your head and whether they are beliefs or whether they are boulders. Because ultimately, the mindset that we show up with is really where we find the power to move in a happy way throughout the day. It sounds simple, but there's so much more to it, because the thoughts that we're holding in our head, that we're marinating on, that we are thinking of, the beliefs about whether we can put a smile on, we can get to the gym, or whether we have to be stuck in this wounded spot. It's about believing that you get to have this chance to rewrite your story. You get to give into a good, wholesome day. I know oftentimes we feel broken and we feel burdened by the weight of the anxiety, the depression, the physical ailments that come. The belief and disbelief that someone could do this, but the belief that we are never going to make it through. Sometimes these beliefs can be boulders. They get us caught up, they trip us. They can roll downhill into other people and cause avalanches. It's really up to us to think each day the thoughts that we have and the belief about our situation and what has occurred. Is this a boulder or is this an inspired belief? I'd like to also talk to you about being able to get outside. So right now, as I mentioned, we are in a deep freeze and we have so much ice and snow and cold that we feel like all we want to do is just snuggle up and not, move. But we have to make a plan for ourselves to get our body moving so that all the good hormones, all the good things that are going on in our body can be revealed. And what I find by moving and getting outside in nature is that I get to enjoy the beauty of the trees, the snow, the birds, all the things that are living in that environment, reminding myself that there is a plan not only for nature and a divine purpose in the way that it works, but also for me as a human being living during this time and overcoming. So looking at the divine healing that can occur when we choose to walk in that path. One of the things that Melinda Metz shared with us is that she found healing in engaging with survivors. She made it a point to walk in the shoes of someone else that was hurting to see how she could help. Sometimes when we get outside of our own pain and our own anxiety about our life situation, and we almost begin to see the trees because of the forest, then we can see that we're not alone. And by doing that, she was able to find inspiration in helping someone and helping them to see the power of next, which then reminded her that her life was important and mattered. I heard from Randy that when being betrayed by someone that you know and love and trust can be like a double whammy. Not only are you affected by the decisions they've made, but also the fallout of that lost relationship. And it's easy to fall into the trap of feeling sorry for ourselves. It's easy to feel like this is all we deserve. Somebody could do this to us, and what must we do now? But through time and his choice to heal, he was able to overcome and see that that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the perpetrator. It's one of the things in my work that I like to try to remind uh, clients or friends that I'm working with to be an advocate for and to support is that the story again can be rewritten, and that the choices is theirs each day. There are steps and processes to working through trauma and loss and grief. And the first thing is understanding that we have to have compassion and love for ourselves. So think about that. Take a look at whether you believe there can be divine healing, healing that comes from within, healing that you're able to bring in from nature and the world, and whether your thoughts each day are being, encountered as boulders, whether they're beliefs in something good or they're boulders that are getting you hung up. I also want to think back to my friend Christine McDonald. One of the most compelling parts of her story was that she didn't understand what was happening through most of the abuses and assaults. She was working to survive, and she was feeling like that's all that she could do was 1 minute to the next. And I think that we need to take a look at those people in our life and be willing to understand that so many of us feel like we're just making it 1 minute to the next. But that when we are able to stop and really ground ourselves in the moment of healing and possibility, and like her, when she got to the point where she knew that she wanted to live a different life and she believed there was better for her, she was able to step out of that into self love. That's so inspiring and encouraging. I know I found it that way. I hope you did too. Melinda went on to found several organizations that offer frontline help. And I don't know about you, but I find real inspiration in the ability to turn something so painful into a purpose. There's something about taking our mess and making it a message. We've all heard that. But we have to remember that, again, it is up to us, because there's a moment when our hopelessness intersects with our desire to have more. And do we step into that moment with love for ourselves, or do we step into it with condemnation? This is really the turning point in a lot of people's journey, is when they realize that they have been hating themselves, their experience, or the tragedy of what has occurred, instead of loving themselves into some healing and wholeness by believing not only that they can move out of that, there can be healing in their spirit and in their soul and in their body and in their mind, and not being gripped by it, realizing that what was meant maybe to harm or to tear apart their life can be turned and used for good. These are the choices that we make when moments like that intersect. I know I had many of those moments in overcoming a brutal victimization, and I am experiencing moments like that again now. I have an offender who will be set for parole soon. And while I thought I was at one part of the story, realizing now that this is coming back into my world in a different way, and I'm going to have to figure out how to integrate that into who I am and what my life and family and friendships are like. So these defining moments are chances for us to step into the hope. But it's a real process. It's something that we have to step into. I've learned so much from these guests, and I hope that you have too. It's been inspiring to see where their world was encompassed by so much pain and anxiety and hurt and pressure. Yet they have found a voice and a way to share with all of us so that we can see not only how they have found the power to move into the next possible moment, but how they've inspired and encouraged others through music and art and parenthood and friendship and relationships. They have chosen to do that. I'm not saying every day was easy for them. I know that Christine shared that a lot of the darkness comes from thinking about how vulnerable she became as a young woman. And the moments of transitioning to something that looked more positive for her took all of the strength that she had. But she, again, was willing to realize that there can be a life outside of that pain. There can be a life outside of that hurt. I love when moments collide. I love when intersections happen that cause us to pivot and turn. And I believe that's what's happening now in our society with the Me Too movement and the Time's Up. There is a place now for our voices to be heard. And there are ways for restoration. There are ways to heal. I love the idea that we can join together as a tribe. We can gather and rally together in compassion and love, not only for each other, but also for ourselves, which is where it really begins, the self-love and self-compassion. Ultimately, those victimizations turn to victories, and those tragedies turn to triumphs. What are you facing today that you never thought you would when it comes to either a relationship, a victimization, a loss, something that has occurred that you never thought would come into your life? How does one begin to process that? Well, for me, I believe that there is a big part of journaling and capturing those memories and those moments so that we can look back and see not only how far we've come, but also that we can understand more deeply the reality of how that's affecting us. You know, whether you do that with actual pen and paper, or whether you do that just in quiet moments, or whether you do that with a friend, it's important to know that the fluidity of our emotions and our feelings around these incidences or losses that are even happening now are important to be felt. You know, one of the greatest experiences is to feel like you have been understood and heard and felt by someone. But the first step to that is to actually step out and share. And so many of you have written and sent messages about just hearing other stories have allowed you to see that by giving voice to the hurts and the abuse, that somehow that lets in the light. And that's what I've taken away from those guests that we've had, is the amount of light that comes off of them, and just by being able to hear and share. Again, Valentine's Day is around the corner. Galentine's Day, whatever it is that you choose to celebrate. I think there should be one for a pet loving day as well. That's where there's so much healing and realizing that you're unconditionally loved. And, you know, whether we choose to find that in pets or family or friendships or an intimate relationship with a partner, work friendships, these are the things that drive us to remember that we're here for a time, and that we, even though we've faced hardships, can reach out and make good and be good and feel good during this time here on earth. You know, I get overwhelmed sometimes when I see the stories that emerge of recent victimizations, or those where the abuses have occurred years ago and they're just now able to share in hopes of some accountability. And I'm believing that our systems are going to tighten around, you know, bringing healing and restoration and justice for victims. But I know, regardless of what that looks like in a system, I'm hoping that we work towards that together, you know, in humanity, not only to begin to believe that we are better than dealing with that. We need to stop abusing and hurting others selfishly, but that we need to encourage and inspire and believe in hope and healing for each other. So truly living in truth, in what your truth is the next step in this process of finding some healing, believing that the truth to you of what it means to go through an incident, go through a loss or a trauma, but allowing yourself to process it and feel it and speak into it brings light to it. The possibility of healing and overcoming only happens when we look at it truthfully, when we are willing to speak about it, as Randy and Melinda and Crystal and Christine have done. Being willing to share, putting it out there into the world is where we begin to find the cracks where the light gets in. Sometimes we see those cracks as negatives. We see that as somehow broken, or we see that somehow as a not whole. But I find it's actually the opposite. Those are the ways that we see humanity in each other. We see that we live in ways that we've had to overcome things. And that's where the light gets into that. That's where we inspire each other. By changing the frequency, being willing to understand that we have to change the frequency, dial it in, because, it's like a radio station. All the stations right now in your area are playing music, but do you hear them all at one time? No. You only hear that particular station when you tune in. So to tune into healing is an actual step that you have to do. You have to be willing to turn the dial. If we are constantly living in a place where the static of our problems and our pain is what's in our head and our bodies, we're never turning the dial to hear the beautiful symphony of healing. That's why engaging in nature and exercise and using things like aromatherapy and meditation may sound like woo-woo to you. You might think, oh, that's silly. But these are ways to get back to the nature of who we are as simple and connected to the earth. I really feel like when we stop and allow ourselves to, even briefly, turn the dial and dial in a different frequency, that allows the truth to emerge. That's when we can speak truth into the pain that we're feeling, sharing it with someone else or with a counselor or with a friend or family member. That's where there is restoration and movement towards a better next. So the power of next is where I want to take us now. And that is remembering that, the compass in our life doesn't always point north. The true north thing that we hear. Sometimes that compass is meant to be facing other directions. It's meant to take us other routes. Have you ever taken a Sunday drive and you take a turn and for no particular reason decide to go down that road and end up seeing the neatest tree you've ever seen, or found the barbecue restaurant that, has just the best ribs, and you never would have found it unless you turned down that road? What about coming across someplace that's playing live music? And, we have to allow that compass to be fluid. We have to allow the compass to take us in places that we might not expect, because that's where the excitement and the power of next comes in. Is knowing that there is a course and charting that course, but being willing to accept changes along the way. Imagine being a sailor and being out on the open sea. You never know the way the wind and waves are going to take you. And you can put your anchor down, you can put it into that miry, yucky soil, and you can hope that it holds you. But with, storms, you never know. With the wind changes, you never know. And I'm not a sailor. I wish I was. I think that's phenomenal, but I love anytime I get to be on a boat. Just taking in the beauty of the openness and realizing that we're just a mere part of this huge planet with, an abundance of resources, natural resources to heal us. Allowing that compass to take us different ways and believing that that's part of our purpose. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's part of the journey of getting to the next. The next holds so many things, but we don't know the next until we're stepping into it. You've all heard the adages about how many times, for example, Henry Ford stopped making the car and wouldn't move forward with that. Other people that have made, huge contributions to our world, and they were almost ready to quit. You've heard those, I'm sure, so many different times. They're fascinating to think that you were one step away from not creating the Hershey bar, right? I mean, what if somebody had given up? So we have to remember that that power of next for us means being willing to believe that it's still possible. And when you're healing from a tragic event, knowing that trauma lives in our bodies, it's imperative for us to find ways to release that. Again, counseling is crucial. Finding someone that you trust to talk to, let it out, speak to it, writing, journaling, maybe a catharsis of going through a criminal justice system or some sort of a system that allows restoration, like working with a law firm. There are so many ways, but first and foremost, it's reminding that the light comes from within us and that story can be rewritten and it's up to us. I loved hearing how Crystal uh, was not able to talk about this abuse for years. She had tried to go to the police early on, and due to a number of circumstances, justice was just not able to be done in the criminal justice system. And for a while, that really made her believe that this was her fault. And shame and blame are two of the biggest indicators and takeaways of an abusive situation, because we sometimes and we look to find ways that we contributed, that it was our fault. That shame carries with us. But shame is something that makes us feel about who we are as a person. And that's the negative effects, is that it changes the view of who we are as a person. So through healing resources, it's important to step outside of that shame for ourselves and knowing that we are where we're supposed to be at this time for this reason. I believe that through outlets like this and bringing light to some of the experiences that people have endured is a way of bringing humanity closer together. This year we have suffered through so many things in our world, and we've all been forced to pick up the pieces. We've been forced to look at the myths around what causes this and what's going to enable us to heal. But again, sharing with each other, finding hope and inspiration is really something we can do together. I love that we have this opportunity to recap and talk about the effects of sexual assault and sexual violence on our guests and on our world. And I'm hoping and believing that together, not only can we stop this from occurring in the future, but that we can inspire survivors to know that they're not alone, that there is a process of hope and people that care right around the corner, that they're willing to understand the challenges that have been faced and helped to find some healing. I have made it a personal mission to remind people about rewriting their story, because I believe what occurred to me in my life as an abuse situation only steered me towards a greater purpose. And that's a choice that I made. But in this world where there is so much hurt and pain and obstacles, I want to encourage people to remember that we're only a step away from a different result. We just have to be willing to believe in change, to believe in healing, and to believe in hope. I say these things because I know they're possible. I've walked that walk. And for those that we get to engage with here, I thank you for being willing to look at Brave, be inspired by Brave, and believe that there is Brave in you. I really appreciate everyone watching today. And until next time, please be brave.